The cool, sterile air of Sector Gamma was Seth's natural habitat. He thrived in the quiet hum of machinery, the scent of ionized air, the meticulous order of a lab designed for precision. A colleague astrophysicist by trade, Seth dealt in hard data, verifiable facts, and the cold, elegant logic of the cosmos. He was a man who trusted what he could measure, dissect, and explain. Superstition, intuition, the nebulous whispers of the unknown. These were the intellectual equivalent of static, to be filtered out and dismissed. A Agent Current Obsession, a project codenamed Lapis Lunae, was a geologist's dream and an astrophysicist's puzzle. It was a lunar rock sample, unique not just for its provenance, but for its extraordinary crystalline structure. A guard any other lunar material brought back, Lapis Lunae shimmered with an internal light, a deep, almost sapphire blue that hinted at unknown mineral compositions. A figure-high crystallinity promised groundbreaking insights into lunar formation, a discovery that could solidify Seth's reputation. "Are the preliminary scans complete?" Seth asked, his voice cutting through the soft whir of the spectrograph. He watched a technician, gloved and masked, adjusting a laser array over the sample chamber. "Almost," the technician replied, not looking away from the display. "Just running the final pass for elemental composition." Seth nodded, his gaze fixed on the monitor. He expected the usual silicates, anorthite, pyroxene, but the sheer purity of the Lapis Lunae was already defying expectations. It was almost too perfect, like something sculpted rather than naturally formed. He dismissed the thought. Geology was a chaotic art, and perfection was merely a rare alignment of forces. A person later, a low, insistent beep emanated from the console. The technician frowned, tapping a few keys. "Getting some odd energy readings, Seth." Seth stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "Odd how?" "Non-electrical, rhythmic," the technician explained, pointing to a fluctuating graph. "Like a pulse. Faint, but consistent." Seth leaned in, studying the waveform. It was indeed unusual, a gentle undulation against the baseline noise. "Have you checked the environmental controls? A witness stray electromagnetic interference?" "I've isolated the chamber," the technician confirmed. "Triple shielded as per protocol." "And the equipment?" Seth pressed. "Is the primary sensor array calibrated correctly?" "Just recalibrated this morning," the technician said, sounding a touch defensive. "Everything's within tolerance." Seth sighed, running a hand over his clean-shaven jaw. "Then it's contamination. A micro-vibration from the HVAC, perhaps. Officer, a minor flaw in the shielding we haven't detected yet." He was a firm believer in Occam's razor. The simplest explanation was almost always the correct one. The idea of a rock emitting a pulse was absurd, bordering on the mystical. "It's persistent," the technician noted, still watching the screen. "Persistence doesn't equate to significance," Seth countered. "It merely means the source of the interference is constant. A detective, a full diagnostic on the sensor. A specialist rerun the scan, focusing on thermal fluctuations within the sample itself. It's likely a structural resonance, nothing more." "Understood," the technician acknowledged, already moving to comply. A technician that evening, as the lab lights dimmed and the city outside began to glow, Seth was still there, poring over the data. The pulse readings, despite the technician's efforts, hadn't vanished. They were still faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present on the most sensitive of his instruments. What truly piqued his logical curiosity, however, was a subtle shift in the anomaly's intensity. A researcher preparing to leave paused by Seth's workstation. "Still chasing that phantom signal?" Seth grunted, eyes on the screen. "It's not a phantom. It's an anomaly, and it appears to intensify after sunset." The researcher chuckled. "The lab cools down then. A colleague, it's just a thermal expansion effect." Precisely my initial thought, Seth agreed, though a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of unease had begun to stir within him. He dismissed it instantly. The lapis lunae is highly crystalline. A slight temperature drop could easily induce subtle structural shifts, creating a measurable resonance. It's a fascinating quirk, if nothing else. We'll simply factor it into our analysis. He watched the waveform on the screen, a tiny rhythmic heartbeat of data. It was just a rock, he reminded himself. A very, very interesting rock. A agent more. The moon hung full and bright outside the reinforced window, casting a long, pale shadow across the lab floor. Seth didn't notice. He was too busy rationalizing the data, filing away the oddity as another variable to be controlled. Science, after all, was about stripping away the noise to find the signal. And the signal, he was certain, would be perfectly mundane. The moon, a luminous disk, seemed to pull at the very fabric of the lab. Seth, despite his scientific rigor, felt an inexplicable tension in the air, a subtle shift in the usual hum of machinery. The pulse from the lapis lunae had indeed intensified. A faint but undeniable throb now discernible on multiple sensors, even after extensive recalibration. It was no longer a quirk to be dismissed. "Are you seeing this?" A technician's voice cut through the quiet, laced with an edge of apprehension. Seth turned to see the technician staring at a bank of monitors. A colleague above them flickered, a stuttering dance that cast unsettling shadows. "Power fluctuations," Seth stated, though the explanation felt hollow even to him. "Check the main grid. We've had issues with the auxiliary generator before." "It's not the grid, Seth," the technician replied, voice hushed. "The power readings are stable. It's localized. A agent these lights, and the spectrograph keeps resetting." Seth walked over, his gaze sweeping the lab. The flickering wasn't random. It seemed to concentrate around the shielded chamber housing the lunar sample. He noticed a colleague, a specialist in exogeology who had been working closely with the lapis lunae for weeks, pacing erratically near her workstation. A colleague's eyes darted around, unseeing, her hands clenching and unclenching. "Is everything all right?" Seth inquired, his tone carefully neutral. The colleague stopped, her head snapping towards him. "All right? No, a guard is all right. Don't you feel it?" The colleague's voice was tight, strained. "Feel what?" Seth pressed, a flicker of concern stirring within him. He had noticed her growing agitation over the past few days, dismissing it as stress from the demanding project. The presence," she whispered, her eyes wide. "It's watching. A figure watching." She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. "There's nothing here but us and the equipment," Seth said, trying to inject calm into his voice. "Perhaps you should take a break. A person some rest." "Rest? How can I rest when it's in my head?" she retorted, her voice rising. "The dreams, Seth. They're so vivid. The moon. It's calling." Seth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lab's climate control. He had heard her muttering about nightmares before, but never with such intensity. "What dreams?" "The craters," she explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're not just holes. They're eyes. And they're opening." She pointed a trembling finger towards the lapis lunae chamber. "It's changing things. I know it is." Seth's mind raced, searching for a logical anchor. Could it be a form of contamination? A witness airborne pathogen affecting neural pathways? He needed to rule out every conventional explanation. "We need to run a full biological screening on you, immediately." The colleague laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "It's not a virus, Seth. It's older. It's inside." She then abruptly turned and hurried out of the lab, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Seth watched her leave, a knot forming in his stomach. He turned to the technician. "Seal off the lapis lunae chamber, triple quarantine, and run a full environmental scan for any biological contaminants. A colleague surface, every air particle. Already on it, the technician confirmed, his expression grim. The air filters are showing trace elements we can't identify. Unidentified? Officer, you certain it's not a common lab dust particle? Seth questioned, refusing to yield to irrationality. Negative, the technician replied, shaking his head. It's a crystalline structure, microscopic, and it seems to be growing. Seth stared at the sealed chamber. The pulsing anomaly had subtly intensified again. He needed data, hard data, to combat the creeping unease. He couldn't let himself be swayed by a colleague's deteriorating mental state, no matter how disturbing. He needed to isolate variables. Prepare a series of biological cultures, Seth instructed, his voice firm. Human tissue, bacterial, fungal. A detective, the unidentified particulate to a subset of each. A specialist need to observe any interaction. Understood, the technician said, already moving to comply. What about the colleague? We'll monitor her remotely, Seth said, though he knew it wasn't enough. For now, our priority is understanding what this rock is doing. A technician blurred into a cycle of frantic testing and mounting anomalies. The flickering lights became more frequent, the shadows more defined, seeming to writhe just at the edge of his vision. The pulse from the lapis lunae was now a constant low thrum, subtly changing in intensity. Seth noticed a pattern. It peaked during the night, particularly when the moon was visible. He correlated the colleague's worsening episodes of paranoia and vivid nightmares with the waxing crescent moon. Each night, as the moon grew fuller, her remote monitoring showed increased agitation, restless sleep, and incoherent muttering. The biological cultures yielded unsettling results. A colleague exposed to the lapis lunae particulate, or even just placed within the chamber's vicinity, showed accelerated growth. Agent colonies spread at an alarming rate. Fungal spores bloomed into grotesque masses, and even the human cell cultures exhibited rapid, uncontrolled division. What was truly unnerving was that this accelerated growth was most pronounced under specific light frequencies that mimicked moonlight. It's like it's feeding them, the technician remarked, his voice barely a whisper as he showed Seth magnified images of a rapidly expanding fungal culture. Seth studied the screen, his mind struggling to reconcile the data. A biological catalyst? A mineral that somehow accelerates organic processes? It was an unprecedented discovery, if true. But the specificity of the light frequency, the lunar connection, was deeply troubling. And it's not just growth, the technician continued, pointing to a different image. Some of the cells are mutating, developing. Crystalline structures within their own matrices. Guard miniature versions of the lapis lunae itself. Seth felt a cold dread seep into his bones. A rock that pulsed, affected minds, and caused organic matter to grow and mutate, mimicking its own structure, all tied to the phases of the moon. This was no mere geological curiosity. This was something else entirely. A figure alive. And it was spreading. Seth stared at the screen, the image of crystalline structures blooming within organic cells, a grotesque parody of life. A figure alive. And it was spreading. The thought, an undeniable chill, resonated with the low thrum emanating from the lapis lunae chamber. It was a sound Seth now felt more than heard. A subtle pressure behind his eardrums. A persistent whisper at the edges of his awareness. The insomnia that had plagued him for days. The heightened senses, the unsettling dreams. They were no longer just stress. They were symptoms. The colleague, Seth stated, turning abruptly from the monitor. Where did she go? The technician, still absorbed in the alarming data, looked up, startled. She just left Seth. A colleague she needed to feel the moon. Seth swore under his breath. The full moon, a brilliant cold eye in the night sky, was at its zenith. He felt a sudden, profound urgency. "Get security. Guard them to locate her, immediately." He didn't wait for a reply, striding out of the lab, his own footsteps echoing the frantic pulse in his chest. He found her not far, in a rarely used observation deck, a glass-walled enclosure offering an unobstructed panorama of the lunar landscape. She stood pressed against the reinforced glass, her face bathed in the stark silver light, hands clawing at the pane. "The moon. It's calling," she whispered, her voice raw, barely audible over the thrumming Seth now perceived as a distinct, low-frequency hum. "It wants me. It's singing." Seth approached cautiously. "You need to come away from the glass. You're not well." She whirled, her face distorted by a terror so profound it stole his breath. A guard pupils were dilated, reflecting the full moon like twin obsidian mirrors. "Don't you hear it? The rock. It's whispering. Secrets. It's telling me everything." She pointed a trembling finger at the distant lab, then at the moon. "They're connected. The craters. Their mouths. And they're speaking." "No one is speaking," Seth countered, his voice steady despite the tremor that ran through him. "It's the stress. The long hours. A figure need to get you proper rest." "Rest? How can I rest when it's inside my head?" She shrieked, her voice cracking. "It's not just the rock, Seth. It's the moon itself. It's pulling me." She began to sob, a guttural broken sound, her body trembling uncontrollably. She clawed at her own hair, pulling at the strands as if trying to tear something out of her skull. "It knows me. It knows what I've done." "Done what?" Seth urged, trying to ground her, though he felt the unreality of the situation pressing in. "It showed me!" she cried, collapsing to her knees. "The darkness, the emptiness, it's coming for us all." The low thrum intensified, vibrating through the floor, through his very bones. Seth felt a wave of dizziness, a flash of something unseen at the edge of his vision. He fought against it, forcing himself to focus. This wasn't just a breakdown. It was a direct, amplified reaction to whatever the lapis lunae was doing. A person then, a guard arrived, alerted by the technician. "Is everything all right here?" the guard inquired, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "She needs immediate medical attention," Seth said, his voice clipped. "A secure, quiet place, and someone to stay with her." "Understood," the guard replied, moving to gently take the colleague's arm. She recoiled, shrieking again, but the guard, trained for such situations, managed to guide her away, her wails echoing down the deserted corridor. Seth returned to the lab, the silence after her departure almost as jarring as her screams. He felt the thrumming in his head, a dull ache now. He walked directly to the sound analysis station. "What are the readings on the low-frequency output?" He directed the technician, his voice tight. "Focus on the full spectrum. A colleague anomaly." The technician, looking shaken, nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's anomalous, Seth. A witness random noise. It's a pattern, and it's changing with the lunar phase. It's peaking right now." He isolated a waveform, displaying it on the main screen. It wasn't a static hum. It was a complex, undulating sequence of pulses and pauses, almost rhythmic. It's like a song, an officer, a language, but it's subliminal. A detective conscious perception for most. Seth leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "Can you amplify it? A specialist out the ambient noise." The technician adjusted the parameters. A faint, ethereal melody filled the lab, a series of elongated, resonant tones that seemed to resonate deep within Seth's skull. A technician at the delta and theta waves. They're synchronizing with the pattern. A colleague's scientific explanations, once so rigid, now felt like flimsy shields against an encroaching tide of the inexplicable. This was something else. an agent that sang. The ethereal melody, once faint, now resonated through the lab, a series of elongated, resonant tones that seemed to vibrate deep within Seth's skull. It was unsettling, yet strangely captivating. He felt a prickle on his skin, a sense of profound unease. The flickering lights in the lab intensified, dancing to the rhythm of the lunar song. "It's affecting brainwaves," the technician continued, pointing to a neural activity graph. "We've been running passive scans on anyone in the vicinity of the sample. The delta and theta waves, they're synchronizing with the pattern. And during the full moon, the amplitude spikes dramatically." Seth felt a cold dread settle in his gut. The colleague's breakdown, her vivid hallucinations of the moon speaking, her claim of it calling, it was all a direct, amplified response to this lunar song. The rock wasn't just influencing matter, it was actively broadcasting, a silent, insidious symphony directly into the human mind. This wasn't a biological catalyst or a mineral anomaly. This was something else. A thing that sang. "Amplify it again," Seth commanded, his voice barely a whisper, yet sharp with urgency. "Play it on a loop. I want to hear every nuance." The technician, pale and shaken, nodded, adjusting the audio levels. The strange, resonant tones filled the space once more. A hypnotic cadence that seemed to reach into the very core of Seth's being. He could feel it, a subtle pressure behind his eyes, a phantom vibration in his teeth. "This isn't random noise," Seth murmured, staring at the waveform. "It's structured. It's a language." "A language without words," the technician replied, his gaze fixed on the screen. "A primal one." Seth shook his head, pushing past the chilling thought. "Find anything? Agent historical records? Any dismissed papers? Any folklore about lunar stones or materials that exhibit mind-altering properties? A guard that connects to lunar phases?" "Most of that is mythology, Seth," the technician ventured, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Then search mythology," Seth retorted, his voice tight. "Search for anything that was ever relegated to myth because it defied conventional understanding. A figure for lunar stones, singing rocks, mind-influencing minerals. Cross-reference with anything mentioning direct lunar phase interaction." The technician began typing, his usual efficiency replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. Seth turned to the lapis lunae chamber, the containment field shimmering around the obsidian-like rock. It pulsed with a faint internal light, almost imperceptible. But Seth knew it was there, a rhythm mirroring the song in his ears. The sample wasn't just emitting energy. It was actively responding to the moon's phases, its activity waxing and waning with the lunar cycle. The current full moon was its zenith, its time of greatest influence, and the next full moon was less than 2 weeks away. The dreams had started subtly, then grown vivid, unsettling. He saw craters as gaping mouths, heard whispers in the void, felt an undeniable pull towards the silver orb in the night sky. They merged with reality, a growing sense of dread that gnawed at his waking hours. The rock was not merely a passive emitter, it was an active participant, a conductor in a silent cosmic symphony, and humanity was its unwitting audience. "I found something," the technician announced, his voice strained. "Obscure academic papers. A person as pseudoscience. They mention selenitic crystals and their supposed psychic resonance with the moon, and ancient texts from various cultures. A witness referring to moon-born stones that could speak to the mind or draw out the hidden self." Seth strode over, leaning close to the screen. The papers were old, yellowed scans, their language dense with archaic scientific terminology and speculative philosophy. The ancient texts were even more vague, steeped in metaphor, but the underlying theme was chillingly consistent. Stones from the moon, influencing the human psyche, particularly during the full moon. An officer spoke of moon madness, others of lunatic visions. A few even hinted at the stones being alive or fragments of a greater consciousness. "It's not just a rock," Seth whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It's a piece of something, a dormant crystalline organism." The thought solidified, cold and sharp. The language it emitted wasn't just influencing brainwaves. It was a form of psychic influence, designed to drive hosts to act on its behalf, or to facilitate its awakening and potentially its escape. The colleague's breakdown wasn't just stress. It was a direct response to this insidious call, a preparation for something far more sinister than mere hallucination. "What do we do?" the technician asked, his gaze flicking between Seth and the lapis lazuli. "We contain it," Seth stated, his jaw tight. "We find a way to neutralize it. A detective the next full moon." "How?" the technician pressed. "I don't know yet," Seth admitted, the confession grating. "But we have to. This isn't just about protecting our minds. This is about preventing whatever this thing is from fully awakening. A specialist unleashing something catastrophic." He felt the low thrum intensify, a subtle shift in the lunar song, as if the rock itself had heard his words. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an unspoken threat. The next full moon was coming, and Seth knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it would bring not just light, but a profound, terrifying darkness. The technician swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear. "But how do you neutralize something like that?" "I don't know," Seth admitted again, the frustration building. "Heat? Pressure? A colleague kind of counter-frequency?" He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. They had to act fast before the full moon reached its peak. "We tried high-frequency sonic waves before," the technician reminded him. "It seemed to strengthen it." Seth cursed under his breath. "Damn it! An agent, it absorbs energy." He stared at the containment field, the lapis lazuli pulsing within. It was as if the rock were listening, learning, adapting. "What about the colleague cage? A guard electromagnetic isolation?" "We can try," the technician said, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. "But it'll take time to set up. The chamber wasn't designed for that level of shielding." "We don't have time," Seth snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "Just do it as fast as you can." He turned back to the screen, scanning the ancient texts the technician had pulled up. The language was archaic, filled with allegories and metaphors, but the underlying message was clear. These moon-born stones were not to be trifled with. They were gateways, conduits, prisons for something ancient and malevolent. "What are you looking for?" the technician asked, his voice tight. "Anything about destroying them," Seth replied, his eyes scanning the text. "Any ritual, any method, anything at all." He found a passage describing a cleansing fire, a ritualistic burning that was said to banish the lunar spirit. But the details were vague, shrouded in symbolism. A figure text spoke of drowning the stone in starlight, a process that involved exposing the stone to intense solar radiation. But that was just as cryptic. "Anything?" the technician asked, his voice laced with desperation. "Maybe," Seth said, pointing to the passages. "But it's all vague. Cleansing fire, drowning in starlight. It sounds like metaphor." "Maybe it is," the technician said. "But maybe it's all we've got." Seth looked at the lapis lazuli again, the pulsing light growing stronger. He could feel its influence, a subtle pressure on his mind, a whisper in the back of his thoughts. "It's getting stronger," he said, his voice barely audible. "The full moon. It's affecting it." "The colleague cage is almost ready," the technician announced. "Give me another hour." An hour is too long, Seth said. He had a bad feeling, a certainty that if they didn't act soon, it would be too late. He had to do something, anything, to disrupt the rock's connection to the moon. "What do you suggest?" the technician asked. Seth hesitated. He knew it was a long shot, possibly insane, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was their only option. "I'm going in," he said. "What?" the technician exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. "You can't do that. It's too dangerous." "I have to," Seth said, his voice firm. "I need to see it, touch it, understand it. A person I can find a weakness, something we've missed." "You'll be exposed to its full influence," the technician protested. "You'll lose your mind." "Maybe," Seth said, "but if I don't, we all will." He started towards the containment chamber, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the lunar song growing louder, more insistent, a siren call in the depths of his mind. He had to fight it, resist it, or he would become just another puppet of the moon. "Seth, wait!" the technician yelled. "Please, there has to be another way." Seth stopped at the entrance to the chamber, turning back to the technician. "Maybe there is," he said, "but I don't see it." "A witness, you?" The technician looked at him, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. He knew Seth was right. There was no other way. "Be careful," he whispered. "Always," Seth replied, activating the chamber's entry sequence. The door hissed open, and he stepped inside, into the heart of the lunar darkness. "Seth, we need to reconsider," the colleague said. "I'm listening," Seth replied. "Show me," Seth said. "I'm listening," Seth replied. "Show me," Seth said. "Interesting." "Seth, we need to reconsider," the colleague said. "I'm listening," Seth replied. "Show me," Seth said. "Interesting." The door hissed open and Seth stepped inside, into the heart of the lunar darkness. The containment field shimmered before him, the lapis lunae pulsing with an eerie internal light. It felt alive. "Seth, what do you see?" The technician's voice crackled through his comms. "It's intense," Seth replied, his voice tight. "The energy is almost palpable. A figure, I can feel it, reaching into my mind." "Get out of there," the technician pleaded. "It's not worth it." "I have to try," Seth said, taking a step closer. The lapis lunae pulsed faster, its light intensifying. He could feel a pressure building in his head, a whispering voice trying to worm its way into his thoughts. He fought it, focusing on his breathing, on the cold steel of the containment chamber around him. "What is it saying?" the technician asked, his voice trembling. "Nothing coherent," Seth replied. "Just impressions, images, fear, hunger." He reached out a gloved hand, hesitating just inches from the containment field. The lapis lunae seemed to sense his presence, its light flaring violently. He could feel a jolt of energy through the glove, a sharp, burning sensation. "It doesn't want to be touched," he said, his voice strained. "Get away from it, Seth," the technician shouted. "Now!" But Seth couldn't move. He was transfixed, drawn in by the stone's alien allure. He had to understand it, to find its weakness. He closed his eyes, focusing all his will, trying to block out the whispering voices, the terrifying images. He reached out again, his fingers brushing against the containment field. This time, the jolt was stronger, more intense. He felt a searing pain in his head, a blinding flash of light. He staggered back, gasping for air, his vision blurring. "Seth! Seth, are you all right?" The technician's voice was frantic. I saw something," Seth stammered, his head pounding. "A place. On the moon. A source." "What do you mean?" the technician asked. "A glow," Seth said, his voice barely a whisper. "Faint. Almost imperceptible. But it's there. A place where this this thing, originated. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. The image was fading, slipping away like a dream. He had to focus, had to remember. "The colleague cage is ready," the technician announced. "I'm activating it now." A low hum filled the chamber as the electromagnetic shielding kicked in. The lapis lunae flickered, its light dimming slightly. Seth could feel the pressure in his head easing, the whispering voices fading into the background. "It's working," he said, his voice regaining its strength. "The connection. It's weakening." "Keep your distance," the technician warned. "We don't know how long it will last." They worked for hours, reinforcing the colleague cage, severing the lapis lunae's connection to the moon. Finally, as dawn broke, the stone went dark, its internal light extinguished. It was inert, lifeless. "It's over," the technician said, his voice filled with relief. "We did it." But Seth knew it wasn't truly over. The lapis lunae was contained, but not destroyed. And he had seen the source, the faint, unnatural glow on the moon's surface. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning. A colleague later, Seth found himself staring at the moon through a powerful telescope. He adjusted the focus, his hands trembling slightly. There it was, the faint glow, almost invisible to the naked vision, but undeniable. It was a beacon, a call across the void, a sign that the lapis lunae was not unique, that it was just one fragment of something larger, something far more terrifying. He turned away from the telescope, his heart heavy with dread. The world was oblivious, sleeping soundly under the watchful gaze of the moon. But Seth knew the truth. He was forever burdened by the secret, forever vigilant, waiting for the day when the lunar darkness would rise again. "What do you think it is?" the technician asked, his voice laced with concern. "I don't know," Seth said, his gaze fixed on the moon. "But I'm afraid we're about to find out." "Seth, we need to reconsider," the colleague said. "I'm listening," Seth replied. "Show me," Seth said. "Interesting." "Seth, we need to reconsider," the colleague said. "I'm listening," Seth replied. "The data doesn't add up," the colleague said. "Show me," Seth said. "Here, see these patterns?" Seth nodded. "Interesting,"